Bonjour and welcome to this week's edition of Invest Africa. I'm Jane Vigi. Côte d'Ivoire is West Africa's second largest economy and a gateway into Francophone West Africa. This week we unpack the opportunities and challenges it presents. Tumisho Makanyele presents us with this report.
Covering a total surface area of just over 32,000 square kilometers, the West African country is home to roughly 22 million people. Like most developing countries, Côte d'Ivoire's economy is dependent on its agricultural sector, which accounts for 30% of GDP and employs two-thirds of the population. Top revenue generators include cocoa, oil and coffee, to which it exports to the Netherlands, USA and Germany. Import partners include Nigeria, France and China, from which fuel, equipment and food products are sourced. Since the end of the civil war in 2003, political turmoil has continued to cripple the economy, resulting in the loss of foreign investment and slower economic growth. The world's top cocoa producer was negatively affected by post-election violence in 2011, which was triggered by incumbent President Laurent Gbagbo's refusal to give up power after being defeated by Ouattara. This saw GDP contracting 5.9%, but the economic outlook for 2012 and 2013 is optimistic, with GDP likely to grow 8.6% and 5.5% respectively. This, however, is dependent on political stability and increased production capacity. President Ouattara, a former International Monetary Fund Deputy MD, has set the goal of becoming a leading emerging economy by 2020. The government has already promised to pump around $500 million into power generation by 2015, in the aim of meeting rising domestic and export demand. Côte d'Ivoire is making significant advances towards peace and stability, but will need continued government support to tackle its development challenges. Tumisho Makanyele, Johannesburg.
Well, joining me in studio this week to take a closer look at Côte d'Ivoire as a business and investment destination is Ebenezer Esoka, CEO of Standard Chartered Bank Southern Africa, Ronak Gopaldas, country risk analyst at RMB, and joining us from our bureau in Cape Town is Julian Veron, analyst at Investec Asset Management. Welcome, gentlemen. Thanks very much for joining us here. My first question to you is, we've just seen that insert painting the picture of Côte d'Ivoire. Do you think that we have an exciting story here? Is Côte d'Ivoire part of the emerging African story, Ronak?
Most definitely. I think significant challenges remain in the country following the electoral conflict in 2010, but definitely huge upside, and I think that the worst is most certainly over. I think if you look at the circumstances which President Ouattara inherited, he had two major challenges. One was the reform of the security cluster, given the fact that he had Gbagbo allied forces as well as his own forces. So he needed to create an army that was sympathetic to that cause, and also recovering the economy which had been decimated by the conflict. And I think if you look at it from that perspective, and the progress that they've made in terms of getting FDI back, restoring economic growth, restarting payments on the country's Eurobond, as well as getting massive debt relief and achieving HIPC completion point, I think that the country's made substantial strides in that regard.
Ebenezer, do you agree, and have they done this all very quickly?
Well, absolutely, because we take a bit of context here. I was a businessman who started a business in Côte d'Ivoire, the heart of the crisis. To give you some context, in 1999, I got the license to register Standard Chartered Bank in Côte d'Ivoire, and 3 days after that, I had the first coup d'etat ever in Côte d'Ivoire. Timing couldn't have been horrible. I went through 3 presidents, got the license from President Bidier, got assistance from President Gueye when I started my business, and the business in Standard Chartered Bank Côte d'Ivoire was inaugurated by President Gbagbo. So I saw it start in 1999. I lived through the experience in 2000, 2001, started my business in Côte d'Ivoire in 2001, and within 18 months, I did break even in Côte d'Ivoire. Because
it was quite a thriving business environment there before, and there were lots of multinationals in the country before the civil war broke out.
Well, that's what took me to Côte d'Ivoire. If you look at the growth rates over 3 years, we're having growth rates averaging 7.5 to 8.5%. That's why we decided to start a business in Côte d'Ivoire. with a weak banking sector dominated by the French banks who hardly responded to the needs of the clients, we decided to start a business in Côte d'Ivoire. An exciting experience for me. Leaving Zimbabwe to Côte d'Ivoire, I started that business. So yes, I do agree. We've gone through the wars. We've seen it go through a civil crisis, a civil war, protracted political conflicts, to the point where the president who inaugurated my bank in Côte d'Ivoire is now at the ICC. February 2013, the conversation started at the ICC. The worst is over, I believe.
So from complete devastation to a turnaround?
Maybe not a complete turnaround.
Not yet.
But the journey has started. It's a positive journey, I believe, we've started in Côte d'Ivoire.
Julian, I'd like to bring you in at this point from Cape Town, from Investec Asset Management's point of view. What do you see as the Côte d'Ivoire story, and are there investment opportunities abounding?
Well, from my side, first of all, I'd like to agree with my, the two other guests in Joburg. I would say that we've identified certain sectors that we like more than others. For instance, we feel that anything that's geared to infrastructure development would be a good starting point. Last year, looking at the performance of the Abidjan Stock Exchange, the BRVM, it was up about 20%, and year-to-date 2013 is already up close to 20% as well. So there's some good stories out there. I did mention infrastructure, so any companies that are sort of industrial cyclicals would come into that basket. I was in Abidjan 2 weeks ago, and I was a bit disappointed by one part of the economy, which was the consumer part. And I felt that there, after years and years of coup and warfare, there's been an increasing part of population has become poorer. I also understand that in some instances, salaries do not track inflation, and therefore disposable income remains under extreme pressure. I suspect as well that the inflation numbers that are coming out are probably not necessarily the situation on the streets for an average household, especially during 2011 at the peak of the crisis. So I don't think we yet ready to play the consumer part of the board of the BRVM. But anything industrial, cyclical would be, we are interested. Obviously, we'll put banks into that basket, sir. We feel banks would be probably the first one to be positioned to capitalize on that recovery that was mentioned earlier, the 7–8% GDP growth for 2013. So yeah, that would be my picks: banks, and then industrial cyclicals.
Great. And
consumer, not just yet.
I'm going to pick up with you, Ronak, from what Julian has just said in terms of the stock market performance and his sector picks. You've just come back from Côte d'Ivoire. What has been your impression?
I think the economic growth story speaks for itself. Last year, the economy grew at 8.5%. It's relatively well diversified by African standards. Mining, agriculture, oil and gas all play a major role in the country's economy. I think under the leadership of President Ouattara, you're seeing a technocratic, business-friendly government. And I think they're making active efforts to rebrand the country as being an investment-friendly one. In that regard, you saw the establishment of the commercial courts in Abidjan. You saw the establishment of a center for investment in the country, known as CPC. And I think being a former IMF Deputy Managing Director, Alassane Ouattara knows what investors want, and I think he's laying the foundation for accelerated long-term and medium-term growth in the country. That said, the economic prosperity of the country does hinge largely on the political and security environment.
Ebenezer, as a businessman, is Ouattara giving you what you need?
I think he is. I mean,
Can you break that down for us?
We have a presence in Côte d'Ivoire, so we're not talking from a distance. We're actually on the ground. Yeah. I knew President Ouattara. I've known him for many years. And I saw him when I started my business in Côte d'Ivoire. What has he done? He's made it user-friendly. If you look at the ease of doing business reports, first of all, I think he started by working on the issues of reconciliation. He has got these conversations going on now to reconcile the various political parties that were apart during the confusion. I think he's been able to engage with the international community to define the way forward for Côte d'Ivoire economically. He's proactively engaged with the private sector. I have met with him and had conversations around this space, and I see him being a catalyst for growth in the country as a whole. And obviously, his contribution to the region has been of significance. He's an elderly statesman in that space, given his prior experience as Prime Minister of Côte d'Ivoire before the conflict under President Houphouët-Boigny. He had a lot of experience there, so he is inspiring confidence in the business community. AFDB, the African Development Bank, it's on its way to return to Côte d'Ivoire by 2014. We've seen Agence Française de Développement, the French development agency, participating proactively in the Ivorian economy. I think the creation of the commercial courts inspires confidence in the private sector. And I must say my CEO is one of those in Côte d'Ivoire who is a member of that particular commercial court, which accelerates the process of resolving disputes when they do come up.
Ronak, yeah?
Yeah, I think from a macroeconomic perspective, Ouattara could not have done a better job. I think that the challenge now is translating that into the micro environment, creating the growth that's going to be inclusive. Given the context of where the country is coming from, with weapons and arms floating around, you've got jobless youths who need jobs, and translating these substantial achievements into something long-lasting is going to be a key challenge. And I think that's where the political reconciliation, political integration, forming an inclusive political process, and addressing the security issues via reconciliation is going to play a key role going forward.
Julian, I'd like you to touch very briefly on the role of Côte d'Ivoire within the West African Economic and Monetary Union, if you don't mind. How strong a role is this?
Well, historically very strong, probably about 40% of the total GDP of the sub-region, and which is actually quite a big economy. I think it's about $50-odd billion and 80-odd million population. So Côte d'Ivoire very much the locomotive of the region. It needs to make sure that it remains so. I think that if you open up WAMU to other countries that are currently not part of it, such as you take Ghana, you take Nigeria, so I'm talking about the ECOWAS members, not yet part of WAMU. I would say that there it'll have to watch out. Ghana has made significant inroad in, for instance, the cocoa production, and I would say that on the logistic, transport, port, I would watch out the space with development in Ghana as well as in Nigeria. So it cannot afford to sit on its hand and stand still. But I think, as the other two guests have said, Mr. Ouattara is a very proactive person, and the balance sheet thus far is very encouraging. I do get a sense when you fly to Abidjan and talk to the friends and the business people that the security has improved a lot, but there's still a couple of issues, such as integration of the army, and I know that there's been a couple of attempts to hijack a cargo ship out of Abidjan as well. I can sense the government is very much on its toes when it comes to hearing noise of another coup to topple up its cabinet. I think that the way they're hunting the ex-President Babgo's members of the FBI in Ghana, for instance, recently. So I can see that there's a bit of tension there, and hopefully it will go away. But yes, a significant improvement in security and laying down the road that will accommodate investors like us, or even private investors. So a positive balance sheet overall.
Julian, going back to the stock exchange and financial market space, the currency is pegged to the euro. Is this a good or a bad thing?
Well, I think that it depends. A few years, like in the early 2000 years, when the euro was strong, it was a problem, and a lot of people were debating the peg and that proved a problem for exporters, obviously. More recently, if you start looking at the graph from, let's say, around 2008, 2009, the weakness of the euro has made the peg less of a problem. Having said that, I think that on the ground there's probably still, like you could say, anti-French sentiments, and I think there's a reluctance, or they would like to see basically the foreign exchange reserve being taken away from the French central bank, which today is handling the foreign exchange of the whole of UEMOA, back into West Africa, just for national pride reason, I would put it. But in terms of business and how it impacts, I would say that the peg over the last 4 years, less of a problem. I mean, if you compare to Nigeria, for instance, the Nigerian naira has been, since mid-2009, fairly stable. It hasn't been depreciated by its inflation differential with the US. And I would say that the exporters out of Nigeria have had a tougher time than their Ivorian counterparts, who would actually have seen their margins open up on the back of a strong dollar and a cost base that inflate by a euro type of inflation. So we'll see where that debate takes us. But I've also talked to the previous ex-Minister of Finance, who told me that first point is that there would not be a removal of the peg anytime soon, and point number two, that we will not see again a depreciation of the CFA franc relative to the euro like we did see in the 90s.
Gillian, we're going to have to leave it there, as we're going to be going to a short commercial break. That's thanks to our Cape Town guest, Gillian Veron, analyst at Investec Asset Management. So, gentlemen, we'll be back after this break. Don't go away. Welcome back to Invest Africa. Under the presidency of Alassane Ouattara, the country has embarked on several reform programs, all aimed at reversing a decade of economic decline due to civil war and political instability. Let's check this report.
Côte d'Ivoire has continued to make strides in normalizing its socio and political environment, and to ensure its economy continues to recover, the government has been pursuing structural reforms in key sectors of the economy.
There's a lot of focus in the energy sector. They want to ramp up their production of electricity. The transportation is quite critical because being an agricultural-based economy, you produce your agricultural commodities and you want to take them to market. So you need a strong transportation sector that can actually then take, your cocoa, your rubber to the port so that it can then be exported. You've also seen in telecommunications, you have to strengthen the telecommunications. We've got big companies such as Sonatel, which are actually not of Ivorian origin, but it's a kind of part of a regional trading bloc, which is quite integrated. So you find those sectors have really been quite key.
As a precondition for an IMF-backed debt relief deal, the government launched a cocoa reform with the aim of ensuring sustainable livelihoods to cocoa growers and encouraging them to boost output while reinvesting in their aging and sometimes neglected plantations. Although agriculture still remains a critical part of the Ivorian economy, the dynamics of the country will be changing, with Côte d'Ivoire looking to strengthen their ties when it comes to regional trade.
You're going to find that the critical mass comes in them being part of a regional trading bloc. And that way they're able to expand their reach from, say, 20 million population to about 100 million population within that region. And then you find that intra-region trading, because the UEMOA is actually a trading bloc that looks at both trade and currency, a common currency. So you find Côte d'Ivoire is actually able to use its size to access the other local markets, such as the Benins, the Togos, the Nigers.
The country has felt the damaging effects of war and political divisions, but with good infrastructure, natural resources and progressive reforms, Côte d'Ivoire should be able to recover economically and find itself back on the path of the political stability it used to have. Tumisha Makhanyele, Johannesburg.
Still with me in studio, Ebenezer Esoka, CEO of Standard Chartered Bank Southern Africa, Ronak Gopaldas, Country Risk Analyst at RMB, and joining us from our bureau in Lagos, Elaine Saraka, AVP, Credit Risk Management of Africa Finance Corporation. Gentlemen, in the last segment, we were talking about the currency, and our guest in Cape Town was talking about the currency peg. I'd like to direct my first question to you, Ebenezer, in terms of the monetary policy. Do you sense that there is enough clarity around this, and what does this tell the business environment in terms of opportunities for investing in Côte d'Ivoire?
I think as a business that's already, I run a business that's registered in Côte d'Ivoire, that's operating in Côte d'Ivoire, the currency peg definitely gives me an indication of where my profits should be and where my dividends should be. So there is an element of consistency over time, and I appreciate that. The real challenge here is that that country doesn't have control of its monetary policy. And for any economy to be enabled, you must be able to have a control of both your fiscal and monetary policy. But what you have across Francophone Africa is that monetary policy is decided within the context of a regional conversation, including the French. So the European Central Bank has a role to play here. My issue there is the timing of policy decisions at times is a bit off, and generally doesn't give you the enabling policy mix in terms of fiscal and monetary to ensure that the right economic decisions are taken in a timely and orderly manner.
Elaine from Lagos, I'd like to bring you in. If you heard what Ebenezer said, do you think that Côte d'Ivoire's monetary policy is clear enough?
The monetary policy is not an asset that the government can use and to improve the situation in the country. Actually, the monetary policy is depending on the West African Central Bank, and everybody has to align to the policy and the decision taken by this institution. So I mean the maneuver for the government in West Africa is very limited because of that. But actually, if you look at the inflation, for instance, I think that the situation is not as bad as we can fear if you don't have a control of your monetary policy. Another asset for the country of the region, and Côte d'Ivoire is one of them, is that the anchor to the European currency, which is an asset for countries like Côte d'Ivoire, of which economy is based mostly on export of raw products.
Ronak, your views?
Yeah, I think I'd echo what both of the other guests are saying about monetary policy. On the one hand, you've got macroeconomic management being prudent. You've got low inflation. On the other hand, the value of exports is seen to be diluted, and you've also got the issue with timing around decisions. I think an important point that I want to touch on is in relation to the country's Eurobond. Since the height of the crisis, yields on that have fallen 700 basis points, which is, in my opinion, an important proxy of sentiment towards the country. Being a post-conflict state, I think the country has a lot of challenges. I've mentioned them. And I don't think it will be sunshine and roses. There are going to be a lot of challenges to overcome. We expect low-level violence to persist through the country. The West is traditionally unstable. But I think after the initial consolidation phase, the Ouattara regime is starting to understand the security challenges. Reconciliation is important in the sense that victors' justice is seen to be perpetrated, and I think now with the postponement of the regional and local elections coming up in April, to get the FPI on board and create an inclusive, holistic political environment, I think we are going to see some positives in that regard. All
right, so Ronak, your points are about security. Ebenezer, we've got just under a minute and a half. Your view on Côte d'Ivoire in terms of doing business in Côte d'Ivoire, is it a good thing right now?
Well, positive. I maintain an optimistic bias to Côte d'Ivoire. Firstly, the president has come up, or the ruling party and the government have come up with the National Development Plan that is going to be to have a bill of approximately $22 billion US, $4 billion funded by the state, $8 billion by the French under the bilateral agreement, and an additional $10 billion that will be funded from for the negotiations with institutions such as the African Development Bank, IFC, etc. So I'm positive about that. Secondly, I think the point that was made earlier, you have municipal elections taking place soon. That will progress the reconciliation process and open up the door in Côte d'Ivoire. We are absolutely optimistic about the prospects of Côte d'Ivoire, and I believe under the leadership of President Ouattara, that will make a difference in that nation. He's got the networks, he's well connected, and is well briefed on what needs to be done, and is open to input from businesses across the region.
Thank you. Well, we've come to the end of this edition of Invest Africa. Thanks to my guests, Ebenezer Isoka, Ronak Gopaldas, and Elaine Saraka. Until next week, from me, Jane Vigi, goodbye.